Hello, dear beloveds. I am so delighted to be here with you today. And this is part three of my sharing of the influences and the spiritual teachers that have really impacted on me. And I haven't sort of been making a catalogued list. This isn't necessarily chronological, although we are kind of moving through certain big phases of my life. And we're kind of arriving in my 30s now. And a really interesting time for me where a lot of my prior faith I was questioning, and I was letting go of a lot of ideas of who I thought I was, and really taking up other ideas of who I thought I was. It was a very fascinating time, and I guess a lot of it was born out of becoming a mother at age 29, very unexpectedly. Not young, but certainly felt young for me. I was halfway through a PhD, and life certainly didn't, I wasn't intending anything like that to happen at that stage in my life. But moving forward a little bit into my mid 30s, or early 30s, I think, when I was looking to have a child intentionally with my partner, I found that even though my first child had come along very easily and unexpectedly, I couldn't easily conceive the child that I was planning and intending for. So one of the things that came into my life around that time was yoga in a really big way. And I'd always done yoga, but I guess it was a very kind of casual relationship that I had, and I hadn't found a teacher that had truly altered me. And I'd heard about this idea that if you find your teacher, then yoga becomes this incredibly powerful force for you. And I can't remember the exact way that it happened, but along with a dear friend of mine, I started to practice at a studio in Melbourne, in the north here where I live. And this incredible woman came along, this incredible yoga teacher who is now known as Uma Spender. And Uma was, even from the very beginning, when I didn't think of her necessarily as a spiritual teacher, a profound influence on my life, and very much, very, very different to your sort of usual teacher. I think there's a lot of amazing yoga teachers in the world, but it was clear that she was bringing something with her that was bigger than just the context of the asana, and bigger than bigger than just moving my body. And it was quite normal for Uma's students to, and still to this day, to become really, really devoted to her. And certainly my dear friend and I, who started practicing with her, became quite obsessed with this woman, and really loved attending her classes, but also just being in her presence. There's a deep grace about Uma, and a deep ancient power that belies her age. She's younger than me, and she's deeply studied in yoga philosophy, and is trained in India, and she has a lot of understanding of yoga beyond a kind of purely moving your body kind of context. But even more than that, you can feel in her presence that you're spending time with someone who is a deep and ancient soul, and there's no other way to put it. And for a long time, it was, I went and practiced yoga with her, and then I went on retreat with her for 2 years in a row, and really loved those experiences. They were very intense, but Uma holds an incredible space. And if you get an opportunity to go on retreat with her, she runs the Goddess and Goddess Rising retreats, which are part 1 and part 2. And I've now been on retreat with Uma across all the different retreats at least 5 times, because it's really in that context that she comes to life. And she's taught me so much about how to run a retreat just by being a participant, because the space that she cultivates is incredible. She's also taught me a lot about yogic philosophy and about goddess mythology, particularly from the Hindu faith. And, all of that stuff is incredible and such a gift to me. But that's sort of not what I want to share. What I want to share is how she's also allowed me to meet the shadow within myself. And this is not an easy story to share, because I have to, basically say I messed up, and I'm grateful that I messed up because it's given me an opportunity to meet my shadow. And that's kind of the whole purpose of everything I do. Yes, to get to know myself better, to be willing to be humble enough to see that how to correct the error. And it's only very recently that error has been corrected, and it's very fresh in my mind, and something that I have gained so much from. So I'm here to share the shadow of my own journey. So what I feel now is that I have an understanding that I didn't have at the time. Of course, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but I recognize that Uma is not just a yoga teacher for me. Uma is, it feels like there's a soul contract between us, and that she is here as a teacher of mine, as a spiritual teacher in a much broader context than just, teaching me yoga, and even just teaching me yoga philosophy. It is the alchemy of her energy and mine, as I'm sure it is for many, many people who spend time with her, that does the work. And it's not surprising to me that when my ego took over, I had to physically separate myself from her, because I knew that if I was in her presence, I wouldn't be able to maintain my feelings of, oh, this is not right, and blah, 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 blah. So where do I begin this? So I went on retreat with Uma as a support person for her. And at that time, the Institute was just beginning, and it was probably, about 18 months established, and it was growing rapidly, and things were changing very quickly. And at the time of that retreat, I was writing Spiritually Fierce in a very fervid way, because it was approaching time for publication. So this is back in 2016. And I went on retreat really, as the support person, so not just a participant, but really wanting to support Uma, because up until that time, I'd seen her do it a lot on her own, and I wanted to be a support for her. And the upshot of it was, over the course of that retreat, she and I guess, had a maturing of our relationship, and I was no longer just seeing her as the student looking up at the teacher and kind of, worshipping the ground she walked on, but I was seeing a little bit more behind the scenes, and the challenges of running a retreat, and the challenges of being in that leadership role, particularly when people are doing the deep work, which is what happens when you're in a really held space, a beautifully held space. And so I found that I was seeing things that I didn't necessarily agree with or didn't like, or it's not how I would have done it. And I was stepping more and more into my leadership role in my own institute. And suddenly I felt really conflicted. Like I didn't agree with everything that was happening, and therefore I didn't feel like there were all these things going on. The long and the short of it was quite a challenging time for both of us. And after that, there was actually very little contact for 2 years, even though I feel like Uma was continually reaching out to me, and there was a continual kind of offering of herself. But I remember her asking me one time very clearly, it sticks in my mind so clearly, she said, "Am I still your teacher?" And I answered in a really flippant way, because at that time she'd moved far away from where I live, so I couldn't practice yoga with her, and I was only seeing her on retreats. And I was very flippant about it, and I was like, I can't practice yoga with you, so, I guess when I'm here, you're my teacher. But she was asking me something much, much deeper. She was speaking to that soul contract between us, that she is assigned in this lifetime as one of my teachers. And even though my ego was reacting from this, I don't necessarily like everything that's happening, and, nothing was untoward. It was simply that I would have done things differently. And as I was forming my own identity as a teacher, it was appropriate for me to know what I would want to do, but it wasn't appropriate for me to feel that things were not going as I would want them to in her retreat. It wasn't my retreat. So it was a very powerful question that she asked me, and I couldn't answer her directly because I actually wanted to reject her as my teacher at that time. My ego was rising up, and I'm like, oh, well, I'm running this institute now, and obviously I don't need her as my teacher in that way, and I have other teachers, so it'll be fine, and I'm a bit disenfranchised. I'm a bit I've seen behind the curtain, and I'm not as enamored as I once was when I was just looking at her as the student looking up at the teacher, even though she had never cultivated or encouraged that kind of relationship of being adored or guru-ified. So 2 years passed, in fact, where I went about my business, and literally went about my business growing the Institute and learning so much about myself, and at the same time feeling this absence of a teacher. I have my beautiful mum, Angelique Adams, and she's a wonderful teacher, but there was something missing, and I was feeling that sense of being slowly starved of that positive influence that had been that energy that Uma brought into my life. And because my ego was saying, well, you wouldn't do it like that, and this is different to what you would want, and blah, 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 that I somehow had to reject her entirely. And that makes no sense now, but now the light's gone on, and of course I can see that. But then this year, only this year, I saw that Uma was running a workshop, and she now lives on the other side of Australia, but she was running a workshop in Melbourne. And my heart felt this love just pouring out for this woman, and this deep longing to be in her presence. And I went to the workshop, and it was like, before she even walked into the room, it was a yoga workshop for hormone balancing. And I just sat down in the room even before she walked in, and it was like my soul was being fed. And that alchemy that I spoke of before between her and I, that actually is not the things, it's not about the things that she teaches me in the physical realm at all, but about that soul contract we have, that she is one of the teachers or the initiators of my soul in this lifetime. That energy just poured through me, and I felt this deep sense of peace, and like I was finally receiving a nourishment that I had been denying myself for 2 years. And afterwards we talked for a few minutes, and it was lovely to spend time with her, and I just felt love, and there was love from her and love to me. There was never any sense of a falling out. There was never an animosity. It was just that my ego had withdrawn me from the medicine of my teacher, because I somehow thought that everything had to be the way that I did things. And I think one of the beautiful things about having a teacher is that you come with an empty cup. It may be that these things that they teach you are very familiar, or they're completely new and strange, but you don't dismiss them just because they're different to the known. If we didn't want to move out of our comfort zone and into the unknown, why would we have teachers at all? Why would we go on the spiritual seeking path? But I had allowed myself to sit in that shadow of thinking that I did it right, and that was all I needed, and I could look after myself. But we need our teachers. We need our teachers, and those teachers will come in many different forms. And for my relationship with Uma, yes, the philosophy, yes, what I learned from her when she runs her retreats, yes, her incredible yoga teaching, like she's a phenomenal yoga teacher. But ultimately it is the energy transference that takes place when I'm in her presence. And so I, in March of this year, went on retreat with her, and it was exactly as I thought it would be, nothing like I thought it would be. And of course it was a homecoming, and it was the medicine I needed and didn't know that I was yearning for. And after that 9 days of a very intense spiritual development process for me and for every woman there, on the final circle, we were sharing, and I said in front of every woman there that, you know, my deepest apologies to her, because I had tried to reject her as my teacher, because my ego had led me down this garden path of believing that I had to do it all by myself, and that if it wasn't the way that I did things, that it wasn't right. And I had denied myself that nourishment for so long, that was just there waiting. And of course, you know, the acceleration in my growth in the last, you know, even 6 weeks since that retreat, or however long it's been, has been phenomenal, because I let myself sit at the foot of my teacher and to receive her alchemy and to be blessed by that energy. And so it's been a very, very humbling and powerful experience. And I feel deeply grateful to Uma for holding the door open. And of course, that's what a great teacher does, is that they do not make it about themselves. Their teaching will, you know, sometimes will make them adored and worshipped, and sometimes will make people want to reject and run away from them. And that's certainly what happened to me, is I wanted to run away from what I wasn't prepared to look at, and that shadow aspect. And this has been such a deep and powerful healing, and deeply humbling. And I've talked before about the fact that on that retreat, I was blessed by the presence of Kali Ma, who put me in a ring of fire after 108 recitations of the Gayatri Mantra, which resulted in an actual physical rash appearing all over my body for the duration of the retreat, and really was about burning away the ego, and that idea of, well, it's got to be this way, or I can do it all on my own, or if I get new information, then what you've shared with me before becomes obsolete. And rather to understand that sometimes our teachers will not necessarily make sense from I need to learn more of this, so I'm going to go and be with that teacher, but actually it's the energetic exchange that's taking place, which means, of course, we are all each other's teachers, and we are all each other's students. And I know Uma would be the first to say that. But I honor her, because in this lifetime, she is my teacher and I'm not hers. And I don't need her to learn anything from me. I am here to learn from her through that energetic paradigm. And I honor her for that. And I never need to be more than that, or different to that, or bigger than that, or whatever else the ego story was trying to bring me into believing. And I'm safe to be in that state of humility, in that state of receptive grace, which is true power. And it's a great divine blessing to have been reconnected to someone who nourishes my soul so deeply, even when I don't necessarily want to do all the things that she does. And it's all of that separation of the person from the teacher is very, very powerful as well. That I'm not saying I would never want a teacher who wasn't congruent with their faith, because we've seen that is what the guru culture is. It's that people say one thing and do another. Uma is 100% congruent. But what I mean is her life is different to mine, and her faith is different to mine. And I don't need her to believe and live the way I do in order for me to still honor her as my teacher. So Uma, I'm not sure you'll ever watch this, but I want to honor you and say thank you for everything that you've brought to me and the deep contribution you've made to the teacher that I am today, and to the student that I am today, and to the woman that I am today. And undoubtedly you have shaped me so powerfully, and I honor you and I thank you and I love you. And thank you to all of those of you who've listened and allowed me to share, because of course this is really good medicine for me as well, to be able to share this with you. And you know, I have more teachers I want to share with you, but this felt like a very important moment of reconnection to self and reconnection to this beautiful woman. And I'll share the details of Uma's retreat. She does have some coming up in Mama Bali later this year, and she is a profound teacher of yoga, but of all things. But I just wanted to share what, you know, this journey is going to do things, and we can remain curious and open, or we can shut things down, but don't be afraid of finding your teachers and honoring your teachers and staying connected to your teachers, even when things are different to where they may have started. If the journey didn't change, then we'd have a real problem. Thank you so much, dear ones. And of course, I have to say it because it's very exciting to me, third level interviews begin on April 24. And if it feels like that I may be one of your teachers and you would do me the great privilege of allowing me to guide your soul through one of the most incredible soul fire journeys, the third level, for a year, then please do book your interview and let's spend some time together and find out if this is alchemy that we're meant to make in this lifetime. All my love.